Thank you so much. So I'm minimizing this for now. And then, do I need to share again?
You are still sharing, so you can just,
Okay.
you're
Okay.
in that view. So yeah, from the beginning. There you go.
Awesome. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this session today. You're taking your valid time for attending this session. So thank you so much for that. And first of all, I would like to thank Daniel for giving me this wonderful opportunity to speak for the Kansas City user group. So let's get started. So today I'm going to present on the topic SQL Engine and its working style. So basically this session is all about SQL Server internals and architecture. So there is so much of content to grab. Hopefully you like it. So let's get started. A little bit about me. I'm a database administrator with 7 years of experience in managing SQL Server and databases. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer and Microsoft certified solution expert. I did my master's in computer technology at Eastern Illinois University, and I blog for dbanuggets.com. That's my website, and you can contact me on Twitter at dbanuggets. That's my user ID, and down below, that's my email address. If you have any questions regarding this session later, you can always contact me either via Twitter or through the email. So what are we going to discuss in this session today? We are going to go through the overview of ACID properties of transaction, ensuring the ACID property, like each and every relational engine should ensure this ACID properties of transaction. And we are seeing an example which will ensure the ACID property. We are also going to go through the different types of components we have in the memory architecture of SQL Server. And we are going in deep into the major components of the memory architecture, that's plan cache and the buffer pool, and how these things gets managed inside the SQL Server. And we are also going to go through the life cycle of a query for the read as well as the write transactions, like what happens behind the scenes whenever you submit a query to the SQL Server. That's what we are going to see there. And we are also going to go through the overview of the different types of components we have in the SQL engine, that's relational engine as well as the storage engine. So internals, why should we actually care? Many DBAs and developers, they work with SQL Server on daily basis, but might not exactly understand what happens behind the scenes when we submit a query to the SQL Server. So knowing this information will help you in understanding how queries are processed at each stage inside the SQL engine. It will also help you in identifying the performance issues very quickly and fix them efficiently. It will also build you confidence while managing the database engine as well as the databases. It will also help you in convincing your coworkers or managers of why they have to take your ideas seriously. Last but not least, we work with SQL Server every day. So the more we know about the SQL Server internals, the better we can understand how the engine works and how databases work. Now let's start with the ACID properties of transactions. Now, what is this ACID? All these major relational engines we have, like SQL Server, Oracle, PostgreSQL, or Sybase, all these major relational engines should satisfy the ACID properties of transactions. So what is this ACID? A stands for atomicity. Atomic meaning a single unit of work. A single transaction can contain one operation or it can contain multiple operations in it. So all the operations inside the single transaction should either complete successfully or none of them. Can you please mute someone is unmuted. So can you please mute them? Thank you. So, uh, so one single transaction can contain one operation or it can contain multiple operations in it. All the operations inside the single transaction should either complete successfully or none of them. For example, we have a store procedure, right? If that store procedure has an update statement as well as an insert statement in it, whenever we execute that store procedure, both the operations in it should complete successfully. Like for example, if the updates succeed and if the insert fails, then SQL Server should go ahead and roll back the entire transaction. That's atomicity. C stands for consistency. The data inside the database should always be consistent. Like for example, if I wanted to do an update statement on a table, and while I'm doing that update statement, and while I'm running that update statement, if something happens suddenly, if the SQL Server went down and we had to restart the SQL Server, once we restart the SQL Server, all these uncommitted transactions should be rolled back, making the data in the consistent state. That's consistency. I stands for isolation. No matter how many concurrent transactions are happening at the same time, Each and every individual transaction should be independent of each other and they should not interfere with any other transactions. For example, if I'm inserting few records into a table, while I'm doing that, none of the other transactions should be interfering with my transaction. So that's isolation. Durability. Durability meaning if at all a transaction is successfully completed and all the data has been already made to the database should be permanent. Like if we had to restart the SQL Server later, all the committed data which is already made to the database should be permanent without any data loss. That's durability. So what components of this SQL engine will ensure the ACID properties of transactions? Atomicity is very easy to be ensured. It is taken care by the parse component of the relational engine. Consistency is also very easy to be ensured. It is taken care by the parser as well as the binder components of the relational engine. Once the atomicity, isolation, and durability are ensured, consistency will automatically be ensured. Isolation is all about the locking mechanism. It is taken care by the lock manager inside the storage engine. Durability is the most toughest of all. It is taken care by the transaction log of the storage engine. Let's see a simple example ensuring these ACID properties of transaction. In our example, we are taking a simple bank transaction. For example, I have a balance of $500 in my account and my account ID is 1 and I wanted to send $100 from my balance to my friend's account, $100 to my friend's account. Her account is account 2, for example. We can do this transaction in multiple ways, right? I can use the online application or I can even use the mobile phone application to do that. So for my example, we are using the mobile phone application. So in this transaction, this is very simple transaction. There are 2 operations in it. The first operation is to deduct $100 from my account. And the second operation inside this transaction is to credit $100 to my friend's account. So whenever I begin the transaction on my mobile phone, on the backend, SQL Server will also begin the transaction. The first operation inside this transaction is to go ahead and update my account by deducting $100, which will make $400. The second operation is to credit $100 to my friend's account. But I suddenly see this on my screen. I am logged out of the mobile phone application and I see this alert saying facility is temporarily unavailable. Now wait, what? What has happened? I'm in between the transaction. My transaction is not completed yet. I do not know if I lost my money, $100, or if my friend has received $100. So I immediately called her and asked if she received any money, which she said she didn't. So I have no other option except to call the bank customer service guys. So when I called them, they said there was a severe thunderstorm and some of the SQL Server went down and they already restarted them. So just think what should happen if this transaction is ensuring the ACID properties of transaction. They already restarted the SQL Server, right? So let's see what will happen. Once the SQL Server restarted, the uncommitted transaction will be rolled back, making the data in the consistent state. So this transaction is ensuring the ACID property. How? The atomicity is ensured by rolling back the entire transaction. The consistency is ensured by reflecting $500 in my balance, which is the initial amount before starting the transaction. Isolation is also ensured. Like, did you observe, like when my account has been updated by deducting $100 from my balance, none of the other transactions were interfering with my transaction. Isolation is also ensured. The durability part is also ensured. Like when the SQL Server restarted, the transaction log made the data roll back and I did not lose my money. My $100 are still there and the $500 balance is reflecting in my account, right? And transaction log helped make this possible. So that's how all the relational engine databases should ensure this ACID properties of transactions. Now let's see the overview of the memory architecture of SQL Server. SQL Server Engine is a Windows program which will use the Windows APIs to allocate memory to the SQL Server. So there are different types of memory architecture we have in the SQL Server, many components, right? But in our session today, we are mainly focusing on plan cache and the buffer pool because these are the 2 major components of the memory architecture of SQL Server. But let's see like what other components we have in it, right? The first component, which is one of the major component, is the plan cache, which holds the stored procedures, query plans, etc. And the buffer pool, which is a major component, it holds the 8 KB data pages and the index pages in it. There are also other types of cache like log cache, token and perm user stored cache. Now what this token and perm user stored cache does is it will save the use, it will store the user permissions onto the objects. There is also other types of cache known as column store cache, which will hold the column store indexes in it. Now, all these caches which you are seeing in the blue color are very special. Now, why I say that? These are very special because they get easily expanded and as well as shrinked when there is a memory pressure. Now, why it is easy for them to be expanded and shrinked is because they have a backing mechanism in them. Now, what is this backing mechanism? For example, the plan cache, which holds the store procedures, the query text behind that store procedure is held in the system tables, right? It's backed up by the system tables. The data pages, which the buffer pool holds, are stored in the database files on the disk subsystem. The other caches, like the log cache, is stored as a transaction log inside the disk subsystem. And the column store indexes, which are held by the column store cache, these column store indexes are compressed and even those are stored inside the disk subsystem. So all these caches in blue color are very easy to be shrinked and expanded when there is a memory pressure because they have a backing mechanism in them. But what about the fixed memory, which you are seeing in the green color? The fixed memory, it is called fixed because it cannot be shrinked or expanded when it is in use because it doesn't have any backing mechanism in them. Now, what kind of things are stored in the fixed memory? The connections to the SQL server, like the memory grants for the hashes and sorts, those kind of connections are stored in the fixed memory. Now, there is other type of cache known SQL Server.exe overhead cache. As you know, SQL Server.exe is an executable and many things will be running this executable, right? Like the thread stacks. Even this component will come under the memory architecture of SQL Server. And we also have other component known in-memory OLTP, which will hold the in-memory, memory optimized tables. Even this in-memory OLTP is a fixed memory because it cannot be shrinked or expanded when it is in use. There should be the cleanup process kicking in to clean up all these in-memory optimized tables in it, such that there will be more space for the newer memory optimized tables to be fit in. So that's how this in-memory OLTP works. And even this is a fixed memory, right? So this is the overview of the SQL Server memory architecture. Now let's see how memory gets managed inside the SQL Server, right? There is something known as LRUK algorithm, which is also known as least recently used algorithm. The -K is for the complexity of the code. Now, what is this LRU? LRU meaning if something is staying in the cache for the longer time, those kind of things will be discarded first. But what happens with the SQL Server? SQL Server will think this way. If there is an execution plan, which is created very easily created with less amount of cost and resources, those kind of execution plans to be discarded first, will be discarded first. And if there is a execution plan which took so much of resources and cost to get created, and then to place that execution plan into the memory, it took so much of resources, then those kind of execution plans will have more options to stay in the cache for the longer time. So there are two types of processes which will manage this memory. One is lazy writer and the other is ghost cleanup. Now let's see how these processes will work with plan cache. Now here is my plan cache. The right side diagram which you are seeing is my plan cache. It's really small. We just have 3 execution plans in it: plan 1, plan 2, and plan 3. For each and every object we have in the plan cache, we have 2 numbers at the bottom of each object. The left side number is known as complexity code value, and the right side number is known as complexity countdown value. So the lazy writer, whenever it will be kicked in by the SQL Server, usually it will be kicked in automatically by the SQL Server every minute. So what it does is, it will go ahead and check if there are any least recently used execution plans. In our example, none of them will be used. So what it does is, it will go ahead and decrement the complexity countdown value by 1 on each object that is not being used. So here, none of them will be used. So what it does is, it will go ahead and decrement the complexity countdown value for the plan 1 from 18 to 17, for the plan 2 from 9 to 8, and for the plan 3 from 2 to 1. And then our lazy writer will go away. In the very next minute, the lazy writer will kick back in again to see if there are any least recently used execution plans. Now in our example, none of them will be used again. So what it does, it will go ahead and decrement the complexity countdown value for the plan 1 from 17 to 16, for the plan 2 from 8 to 7, and for the plan 3 from 1 to 0. Now, did you observe for the plan 3, the complexity countdown value has been turned to 0. That means the SQL server should come and it should flush out this plan out of the cache, right? But that is not what it is going to happen. There is some other process known as ghost cleanup, which will be kicked in by the SQL server every few minutes. Now, what it does is it will come and it will check if there are any execution plans with no countdown value. Once it finds them, it will go ahead and flag them as ghosted. That means they are still in the plan cache, but they are in the half-life. Like for example, if we have a memory pressure tomorrow, right? Whenever we have a memory pressure, the ghost cleanup will come and it will check for these ghosted execution plans regularly. When there is a memory pressure, it will come and it will clean up all these, it will flush out all these ghosted execution plans out of the cache. But if there is no memory pressure, then the SQL server is still going to keep these ghosted plans in the cache such that somebody might come tomorrow to use the same execution plan. So that's how the ghost cleanup works. In the very next minute, the lazy writer will kick back in again to see if there are any least recently used execution plans. In our example, the plan 2 will be used now. So what it does, it will go ahead and increment the complexity countdown value for the plan 2 to its original value, which is 9. So that's how the lazy writer and ghost cleanup works. Now let's see how the buffer pool gets managed. As you know, the buffer pool will hold the data pages as well as the index pages in it. It basically have to manage 3 kinds of different structures in it. One is heaps, the other clustered indexes, and the non-clustered indexes. For example, if you wanted to do a select star from a heap table, you know what will happen. The buffer pool should go ahead and grab all the pages into the buffer pool, right? That means it's so much of IO and so much of resource consuming it is, the process. So once it grab, then you have to do the operations in the buffer pool, which is very IO intensive. But instead of that, if you put the clustered index and non-clustered indexes on the top of that heap, the buffer pool has to go few trips to the disk subsystem to grab those pages into the buffer pool. So basically these indexes will help reduce the IO as well as speed up the query process. Now, how this buffer pool gets managed? There is something known as checkpoint process, which will be kicked in by every few minutes by the SQL server automatically. Now what it does, it will go ahead and check if there are any dirty pages in the buffer pool. Now what are these dirty pages? Dirty pages are the pages which are already modified in the buffer pool, but they are not yet written to the disk. They are not yet hardened to the database file system. So what this checkpoint does is it will go ahead and check if there are any dirty pages, flush those dirty pages into the database file system and harden them onto the disk. So that's how the checkpoint process works. So you can manually run this checkpoint word in your management studio. Like whenever you wanted to do, you can do it on the fly. What it does, it will just go ahead and flush all those dirty pages into the database file system. So that's how the checkpoint process will manage the buffer pool. Now, this is a very important slide, like how our SQL optimizer will choose as the plan. As you know, the SQL optimizer is a cost-based optimizer. It always wanted to choose the good enough plan instead of the best plan. Now, what is the difference? The time and the cost is the difference. For example, we have a simple select statement here with a 4-table join in it. And each table has a clustered index and 3 non-clustered indexes on each of them, for example. And if our optimizer have to go and choose the best plan instead of the good enough plan, what it have to do? It have to go ahead and analyze 72 different types of physical access method per table. Just imagine per table. We just have this very simple select statement with 4-table join, but it have to go ahead and analyze 72 different types of physical access method per table. Like for example, it have to choose whether it have to do the unordered clustered index scan or unordered non-clustered index scan with a covering index, all these kind of physical access methods, 72 per table. And on the top of it, it have to go ahead and analyze 24 different types of logical join orders. Now, what is the logical join order meaning? In our example, we have a 4-table join, right? For example, the join between A to B will filter out 40% of the records from the result set, and the join between B to C will filter out 90% of the records from the result set, for example. Then the optimizer will go ahead and reorder the join in such a way that it will push the join between B to C in front of the statement and rest of the joins back of it. Now, why it does that? Because it wanted to get the optimizer wanted to get the results as quickly as possible. And on the top of it, it have to go ahead and analyze all these different types of transformation rules. And by analyzing all these types of transformation rules, it will gather approximately 26,000 possible plans. If at all we have to choose the best plan out of it, right? Just imagine how much resources and cost does it have to manage to gather all these plans and to choose the best plan out of them, right? That's the reason the SQL optimizer doesn't want to analyze all these transformation rules and find the best plan by taking these many resources. Instead, what it does is it will go ahead and choose the good enough plan as quickly as possible. So that's how the optimizer chooses the good enough plan. So I would like to thank Kevin Klein for loaning me this example. And if I wanted to say the same concept in a very simple words, for example, if our optimizer chooses the strategy A execution plan in 3 milliseconds and the strategy B execution plans in 3.5 milliseconds, and the optimizer has to go and analyze so many rules for 5 minutes in order to know if the plan A is better or B is better, it doesn't want to go and analyze for 5 minutes. It just wanted to just go ahead and randomly choose the plan A or plan B out of it. That's why our optimizer is very quick. It grabs the good enough plan instead of going and analyzing all those transformation rules. Now let's see the life cycle of a query. But before going into the life cycle of a query, I would like to ask if there are any questions.
So far, currently, I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but also if you're taking questions, anybody have one, feel free to speak up. I think you're good.
Awesome. So let's see the life cycle of a query, like how the query runs on the background, right? So if our life cycle of a query is divided into 3 different steps, the first step components contains the parser, binder, simplification, and the trivial plan. These components from the first step are very easy and very lightweight to the SQL Server. It doesn't need any much metadata except for the table and the query definitions. That's all it needs. When you come to the second step contains the components load metadata, join heuristics, and the search phases. Now, all these components inside the second step, most of the metadata that it requires to process any query are gathered at this second step. When you come to the third step contains the components access methods, transaction manager, and the buffer manager. Now, when you compare with the first step, second step, and third step, the third step components are very IO intensive and very cost based. Now, why I say that? Because we have buffer manager in it. The buffer manager has to go and grab the data pages and index pages out of this subsystem, right? Which is very IO intensive. That's the reason it is more cost based when you compare with the other steps. So basically the first step components and the second step components comes under the relational engine, and the third step components will come under the storage engine. This is just our overview. Now let's see how a select query runs behind the scenes at each component of this SQL engine, right? We have a user here, for example, and he wanted to run a select statement onto the SQL Server. Before running any select statement, like he might be using different kinds of interfaces to do the same, to run the same select query, right? He might be using SQL Server Management Studio or Azure Data Studio or .NET Visual Studio or even a third-party application. No matter what kind of interface he uses, the process remains the same. So first, the user should get the secure network connection to the SQL operating system. Now, how does he get that? There is something known as SQL Server Network Interface, also known as SNI. What this SNI does is it will establish a secure network connection between the client as well as the SQL Server. The client is our user here. Now, how does it creates a secure network connection? It will use the internet protocol. Like we have different types of protocols, right? The TCP IP protocol, named pipes, and shared memory. In our example, we are using TCP IP protocol, but no matter what kind of internet protocol we use, the process remains the same. So once the secure network connection has been established between the SQL Server as well as the user, the query that the user is sending will be wrapped into a tabular data stream packet, and it will be given to the SQL operating system by the SQL network interface. So once our query in the form of a TDS packet reaches the SQL operating system, the SQL operating system, first, it will identify that coming connection as a SQL connection, and it will assign a SPID to it. You know the SPID, right? The SQL process ID. Whenever you run SP-WHO or SP-WHO2 in your management studio, you see the SPID 97, 104. Those SPIDs are the connections, active connections that are made to the SQL Server. So once the SPID is assigned, then our query that we are sending is in the TDS packet, right? The SQL operating system will go ahead and wrap that tabular data stream packet and identify that query as a SQL query, and then it will give the query to the first step inside the relational engine. So the first step inside the relational engine is the parser. So all these components from the first step are known as pre-optimization stage. So the second step and the third step comes under the optimization state, but all these components from the first step comes under the pre-optimization stage. Just remember that. So the first component inside this relational engine is the parser. So what does the parser does is, it will go ahead and just check the syntax of the query. Like for example, if you wanted to run select star from a table, but by mistake you have given select star from, then at this point, the parser should identify that query as syntactical error, and it should throw back the error saying that it is syntactically incorrect to the user. And also at this phase, the variables are declared, like whenever, if you are using the variables, if they are declared properly or not, those kind of things are identified here. And views are expanded here. For example, whenever, for example, if you are doing a select statement which have a view in it, behind the scenes, the parser will expand that view. The code behind that view will be brought in line into the query we are running. And with all this information, what the parser does is it will first put a hash on our query, and it will check for the exact match of the execution plan from the plan cache. If it finds the exact match, then it will go ahead and use that same execution plan from the plan cache for the execution phase. But what if it doesn't find the exact match of the execution plan? It will go ahead and build the initial logical parse tree at this phase. Once the logical tree, initial parse tree has been built, the query is now sent to the binder phase. So what happens at this binder component is the parser will just identify the syntax of the query, but the binder is the one which will identify the columns as well as the objects if they are valid or not. And the binder is also known as algebraizer or normalizer. And at this binder phase, the user permissions onto the objects are checked, and the data type resolution happens here. Now, what is the data type resolution? For example, if you are doing a select statement between two tables and you are using a union clause in it, the ordinal column of those two tables should be of the same data type. We'll see in more detail in our demo about this data type resolution. And the aggregate binding happens here, like the sum, average, those kind of things are bound here. With all this information, once again, our parse tree inside the plan cache is updated, and then our query will be sent to the simplification component. As the simplification component name suggests, it simplifies the query. For example, if your query have a subquery in it, then the simplification will go ahead and remove that subquery and convert that subquery into a simple join. So even though if you are running a subqueries on the backend, what it happens is it uses a simple join. So with this information, and also the contradiction detection happens at this phase. contradiction detection, meaning if there is a foreign key relationship contradiction, those kind of things are checked here. And with all this information, the parse tree inside the plan cache is once again updated, and our query will go to the trivial plan component. So what happens at this component is, if our query that we are submitting is really simple, like for example, select star from a heap or select star from a table with a very simple where clause, then SQL Server, what it thinks is, this query that the user is submitting is very simple. Now, why should I even go ahead and update the parse tree that the other components have built until now? Why should I even consider that? Let me just discard that parse tree inside the plan cache that has been updated until now, and I will go ahead and create the trivial plan on the fly, because it doesn't cost me much. It doesn't cost me any resources or time for me to just create the trivial plan. I'll just go ahead and create this trivial plan, no matter how many times the user will be running the same kind of simple query, right? And once it creates the trivial plan, it will use the same trivial plan for its execution phase. But what if our query is not so simple? What if our query has like 10 tables in it and complicated logic in it? It is identified as a complicated query, and trivial plan doesn't get created. Our query will be sent to the second step of the relational engine. Now, our query is at the second step of the relational engine. So the first component inside the second step is load metadata. Now, most of the metadata that has to be gathered to process any query are gathered at this component. Like for example, the index statistics and histogram. Now, what are these index statistics and histograms? These statistics are the blob structures which are stored in the system tables by the SQL Server. Statistics are the structures which describes the distribution of the data inside a column or set of columns or an indexed view. So all these statistics are gathered here, such that once they are gathered, the memory grants happens, those kind of things are allocated to the query. So index statistics and histograms are gathered here, and then auto create statistics happens here. For example, if you are frequently running a select statement and searching on a where clause with a column in it very frequently, then the SQL Server will go ahead and create statistics, auto create statistics on that column, even though if that column doesn't have any index on it. Of course, you have to enable the auto create statistics database option on to make this happen, but auto create statistics happens here, and cardinality estimates are gathered here. Now, what is this cardinality? The total number of rows that the SQL Server estimate that will come out of a table at each operator inside the query tree. So those kind of cardinality estimates are gathered here. And then the SQL Server and SQL Server collation and Windows collation are gathered here. And set options are also checked. For example, if you have a set XML on or set XML off or set ANSI padding on or off, depending upon the on or off, our execution plan might be dependent. And with all this information, the parse tree inside the plan cache will be once again updated, and then our query will be sent to the join heuristic phase. Now, in a couple of slides before, I have talked about this reordering of join order. That's what happens at the join heuristic component, but let me explain it again. If we have a simple select statement with a 3-table join in it, and for example, the join between A to B will filter out 50% of the records from the result set, and join between B to C will filter out 99% of the records from the result set, then the optimizer will go ahead and reorder the join in such a way that it will reorder the join between B to C in front of the statement and push back the rest of the joins back of it. Now, why it does that is because it wanted to grab the results as quickly as possible. And with all this information, the parse tree inside the plan cache is once again updated, and then our query is now sent to the search phases. In the very next slide, I'm going to discuss in deep into what are the search phases are, but just remember, for now, just remember that our optimizer is a cost-based optimizer. It always wanted to choose a good enough plan instead of the best plan. Now, how it chooses those plans are any query, for any query, read, write, no matter what kind of query it is, the optimizer has to go and choose the execution plan from these three phases, the phase 0, phase 1, and phase 2. Once our execution plan, good enough execution plan, has been selected from these three phases, the execution plan will be once again updated at the plan cache. And then finally, a hash is put on that execution plan. And our query will be now sent to the third step of the storage engine. Before going into the third step of the storage engine, let's see what these search phases are. Now, our optimizer, for any kind of query, it have to go ahead and grab the execution plan from these three phases. The first, phase 0, is known as transaction plan. All the plans are created at the pre-optimization stage. Like, do you remember I mentioned that the first step of the relational engine, the parser, binder, simplification, and the trivial plan, all those components will come under the pre-optimization stage. So the trivial plans are generated at this phase 0, right? Because the trivial plan component we have at the pre-optimization stage. So that's the reason the trivial plans are generated at the phase 0. And these plans are created for the very simple queries with a maximum of 3 tables. And they are created as quickly as possible. It doesn't cost any resources or cost for the SQL Server to generate these trivial plans on the fly. And very basic heuristics are needed to generate these trivial plans, like just the table definitions or query definitions, very simple. When you come to the phase 1, the phase 1 is also known as a quick plan. These are a little bit complicated queries, like with a maximum of 8 tables. More transformation rules are needed than the phase 0. Now, what happens at this phase 0 and phase 1 is the SQL optimizer will take our query that we are submitting, and it will check for the already existing execution shapes. And if it finds one of the good fit, it will go ahead and grab that execution plan for that query. So that will happen for the phase 0 and phase 1 execution plans. But that is not the case with the phase 2. Phase 2 is also known as a full plan. This is called full plan because these execution plans are created for the more complicated queries, for the more complex queries. And these the queries will contain more than 8 tables, in them. And most of the parallelism spills and spools to the TempDB happens at this phase. And most of the transformation rules are unlocked here. Now, what the phase 2 does is the optimizer, it won't take our query and it will compare with our existing execution shapes. It don't do that in the phase 2. What it does is instead, the optimizer will go ahead and prune off all the transformation rules which we are not using in our query. Like, for example, if we are not using for example, the n-var max or blob data types in our query that we are submitting, the optimizer will go ahead and prune off all the transformation rules which are related to that n-var max and blob data types, such that it will go ahead and grab, it will go ahead and analyze as many as transformation rules as possible to get that good enough plan. So that's how the phase 2 execution plans are generated. Now, that's how our optimizer have to choose from these 3 execution plans. Now, our read transaction that we are submitting to the SQL Server is at the third step of the storage engine. Now, the first component inside the third step is access methods. Now, the access method components itself, it doesn't perform any action, but what it does is it will just go ahead and analyze how it have to gather all the results from the database files. Before going into the transaction manager, let me point this out. Like, no matter what kind of query we are submitting, it might be read, write transaction, no matter what type of query, all these queries should pass through the first step as well as the second step to get into the third step, depending upon the complication of the query. If the query is so simple, then it will go ahead and grab the trivial plan from the first step and it will go for the execution phase. But if our query is a little bit complicated, it has to pass through the second step. But all the difference for the read as well as for the write transaction happens here in this third step, where is the difference happens at the transaction manager as well as the buffer manager components. Rest all remains the same. So once our read transaction, as this is our read transaction, our query is now sent to the transaction manager component. So there are two subcomponents in the transaction manager. One is the log manager and the other is the log manager. But as this is a read transaction, we doesn't have to invoke the log manager. You know why? Because we doesn't do any modifications to our database pages, right? So that's the reason we are not, the transaction manager will not invoke the log manager part of it, but it will go ahead and invoke the log manager part of it. And then it will request the buffer manager to put a shared lock on the resources it needs to process this query. So once our query has gone to the buffer manager component, the buffer manager component, it will go ahead and first put the shared lock on the resources that it needs. Now, why shared lock? Because this is a read transaction. We just put the shared lock. We don't want to block any other queries, right? That's the reason it will just put a shared lock on the resources it needs. And then it will go ahead and check if there are if all the resources that it needs are already in the buffer pool. If some of the pages are not in the buffer pool, or if none of them are in the buffer pool, then it will go ahead and grab those data pages in the form of 8 KB pages, put them in the buffer pool, do all the operations over there, and send the results to the user. That's how the read transaction works. Very simple. But what happens with the write transactions, right? The access methods, the same, like it doesn't do operation by itself, but it will just gather how it have to, it will just analyze how it have to get the results from the database file system. Once our query has sent to the transaction manager component, now all the difference happens here. Now the transaction log will be invoked because we are doing the modifications, right? This is the write transaction. Before doing any modifications to the database pages in the buffer pool, the modification should be first returned to the transaction manager component. So once the transaction log has been written by the transaction manager, it will go ahead and invoke the log part of it, the log manager part of it. And it will request the buffer manager to put an exclusive lock on the resources that the buffer manager needs to perform this action. But why exclusive lock is because this is a write transaction and we do not want any other transaction to be interfering with our transaction. That's the reason the exclusive lock is needed. So once our query is sent to the buffer manager component, the buffer manager component, it will first put the exclusive lock on the resources it needs to perform the action. And then it will go ahead and check if all the resources that it needs to do this operation are already in the buffer pool. If some of them are not there, or if no pages are there in the buffer pool, it will just go ahead and grab those pages in the form of 8 KB pages, just like the read transaction, put them in the buffer pool, make all the modifications over there, and send the success message to the user. That's how the write transaction works. But did you observe here, the data pages are already modified in the buffer pool, but they are not hardened to the disk subsystem yet. That's when the checkpoint process will kick in to just find out all the dirty pages. It will grab all those dirty pages and push them back to the database file system and harden them onto the disk. That's how the write transaction works. Now let's see the demo. Like I'm going to show you a demo of how these pre-optimization stages works in our management studio. So Daniel, are you able to see my management studio?
We're still seeing just the shrunk down start demo page.
Okay, so maybe
so not managed.
Maybe I have to share back again. So let me share my screen again. Now you are able to see, right?
Yes, I can see Management Studio
Awesome.
now.
So in our demo, we are taking the sample of AdventureWorks 2016 database, and for now we first wanted to see how the parser work, the first component inside the first step of the relational engine. So in order to do that, I am setting the parse only option on. Now, when I turn this parse only option on, what it does is it will just parse the query. It doesn't execute the results, or it doesn't generate any execution plan. All it does is just parse the query. Now I'm doing a very simple select statement. All the syntactically it is correct, so it should not throw me an error. Here, as the variables are declared at this parser stage, I did not declare the variable, but I used the variable in the where clause. So now it should throw me an error because that is syntactically incorrect, right? Must declare the scalar variable. Now let me see if a parser will identify this select non-existing column from the non-existing table. These two are not existent. Let's see how this works. It doesn't throw me any error because parser will just identify the syntax, but binder is the one which will identify the objects, right? So it won't identify anything. So let me turn off this parse only option off, and let's see how this format only option works. Now, when I turn this set format only option on, both the parser as well as the binder components will be triggered. Let me turn on this option on. Now, whenever we set the format only option on, it doesn't generate any execution plan, or it doesn't execute the results. All it does is it will just activate the parser as well as the binder components. So here we have a very simple select statement, and we wanted to see how the parser and binder works here. Now all of these objects are valid, so it should not throw me an error. It doesn't produce any results, as I said. So now again, I wanted to run the same select non-existing column from a non-existing table, but this time the binder will kick in, so it should throw me an error saying invalid object. And let me turn off this format only option off, and let's see how the during the binder component the data type resolution happens, right? Now how does that happen? Here we have a very simple select statement. We are doing a select in between the two tables, and both of the ordinal columns of these both tables should be of the same data type. The customer ID is of the integer data type, as well as the sales order ID is also an integer data type. So whenever I execute, it should not throw me any error, right? Both of them are of the same data type. But what happens when we manually create a data type resolution error? Like the customer ID is of an integer data type here, and the credit card approval code is of a varchar data type. So whenever I run this statement, it should throw me a conversion error. So that's how the parser and the binder works. Now let's see how the simplification work. Again, for this demo, we are using AdventureWorks 2016 database. Let's see like how the simplification will convert the subquery into a very simple join statement. We have a subquery in this statement, and let's enable the actual execution plan. When we run it and when we check the execution plan, did you see that it just converted that subquery into a simple inner join? So that's how the simplification works. And let's see, and simplification also, what it does is it will remove any redundant joins that we are not using, any redundant tables that we are using in the query, but actually we are not grabbing any results from them. So in this select statement, we are only getting the columns from the sales order header table, see the columns, but we are not getting any of the columns from the customer table, but we are using in the join. So let's see how this works. When you run that and when you see the execution plan, it doesn't grab any results from that redundant table we are not using. It will only get the results from the sales order header table. And let's see how the simplification will handle the contradiction thing. Like we have a simple select statement here, and I manually created the contradiction by saying where territory ID is equal to 1 and where territory ID is not equal to 1. Now, when I execute this statement, it should not produce any results. And also it doesn't, did you observe like it doesn't throw any error because this is a pre-optimization stage, and the SQL optimizer doesn't know what values we are using in our where clause. And let's see how the trivial plans are generated at the trivial plan component. Now this is a very simple select statement. Whenever you run a very simple select statements like this, the trivial plans are generated, like a very simple select statement with a simple where clause. When we execute it and when we check the execution plan and go to the properties. When you check here, did you see the trivial plan? The optimization level is the trivial plan. Now, why the optimizer choose this is because it doesn't cost much. It is very easy, very lightweight to the SQL Server to go and create the trivial plan on the fly, no matter how many times the user runs the same query, like 1,000 times. The trivial plans are generated 1,000 times because it doesn't cost much. And by default, these trivial plans are not saved in the plan cache because the optimizer doesn't, because the SQL Server doesn't think like, why should I even waste the memory in the plan cache when these are really easy for me to create the trivial plans. I do not want to save these trivial plans in the plan cache. Instead, I will save the same memory for the more complicated execution plans. So that's how the SQL Server thinks. Now, but there are always some cases, right, where you wanted to save the trivial plan. There are options that we can convert this. We can manually convert this particular query to the full plan by enabling the trace flag 8757. But I sincerely do not suggest to do this in your production because there is a reason why SQL Server doesn't want to save these trivial plans in the plan cache, right? But there are always cases where you always wanted to force them to be a full plan and store these full plans into the plan cache. Now, whenever you enable this trace flag 8757, it is only bound to that particular query. It doesn't affect any other databases or it doesn't affect any server level components. It always just for that query you are running. When you execute that query, let's see if it goes and convert that into a full plan. Now, when you see here, it will go ahead and convert that into a full plan. So that's how the simplification and the trivial plan component works. Now let me hop back into my slides again. No. So what we have gone through in this session is we have gone through the overview of ACID properties of transaction with a simple example ensuring the ACID properties. We have gone through the overview of different types of components we have in the memory architecture of SQL Server. And we have gone in deep into the plan cache and the buffer pool, as these are the major components of the memory architecture and how these gets managed by using the process that we discussed in the session, and how the life cycle of a query works, like when for both the read transaction and as well as for the write transaction, what happens behind the scenes at each component inside the SQL engine. And we have also gone through the different types of components we have for the SQL engine, that's relational engine as well as the storage engine. So there are many awesome resources if you would like to go more in deep into the SQL Server internals and architecture. Kevin Klein have those wonderful articles as well as webinars where you can go ahead and learn more about it. And there are a couple of more resources that I used for preparing this session. So please go ahead and learn from these resources. And I would like to thank once again Daniel for giving me this wonderful opportunity for presenting at the Kansas SQL Server user group. It's an honor always, and I would like to see you again with a new session. And if you have any questions, please shoot at me.
All right. Well, Depti, that was great. It's always nice, no matter how long I've done this, getting refresher of some of these really good foundational things, understanding what the query processor is doing. Again, as many years as I've done it, I always find going over these courses that there's something else I always learn again, and I'm like, oh man, that's just a nice little thing to be refreshed on. So thank you for that.
Right.
And even though I've seen sessions like this by Kevin, it was nice watching you do it because you bring it a different life to it, different flair to it, and it was very, very enjoyable. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Glad it helped.
Absolutely. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I will go ahead at this point. I will. Oh, there is one, but let's go ahead and I'll stop the recording, and then we'll go into the questions, and we'll go that way.